I'm Tristan Adey. I'm a member of the Tempest Collective here in Vermont, in Burlington. And I wanted to welcome people to this panel on the need for political strikes to stop Trump. Clearly, we are living through unprecedented times that feel absolutely terrifying, overwhelming, incredibly challenging. There are no easy answers in how to build a resistance to that, at the same time that there is a real resistance growing. As people know, hopefully there's a Labor Day demonstration coming up this coming Labor Day, Monday, that is an opportunity for unions and working people to get out and flex their muscle against Trump and his agenda. But crucial to that overall project of building that resistance is building political strikes, using our power as workers to actually stop his agenda, to shut the system down as needed, or which is needed, actually. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our panel here, and then we're going to be hearing from each speaker for a total of about 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion and further feedback from the speakers as well. So we're really lucky to have just an excellent lineup here tonight of some of our leading working class fighters throughout the area who have been involved in this struggle, who have been building it from the ground up with their coworkers, through their unions, through their organizations, et cetera. So our first speaker is going to be Nolan Rampy. He is a clinician at the Howard Center, and he's the vice president of AFSCME Local 1674, also a member of the Tempest Collective here in Burlington. Our second speaker is going to be Matt Gile, who is a librarian in Winooski and very active in the National Education Association, his local chapter or his local of that union. And then third is going to be Elizabeth Dunford, who is a member of my union. I'm lucky to be a member of her union, UVM Staff United. She's very active in labor for Palestine and has been really key in building up the upcoming Labor Day demonstration as well. And then finally, Maribel, who is a farm worker and a member of the Migrant Justice Coordinating Committee here in Vermont. So really, again, very delighted to have these panelists and looking forward to what you all have to say in the discussion as well. Sorry, Nolan first.
All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm super excited to be a part of the panel this evening. I think this is going to be a great event. I wanted to just sort of start off by talking about the context we're in and then provide sort of a historical overview of what unions have done historically in this country as a way of pointing, looking backwards as maybe a way of pointing the way forward for how we can move forward from here. I don't need to tell anyone here that the Trump administration is engaged in a full frontal assault on basically every aspect of society. His administration is gutting the social safety net for people, is waging an attack on the most vulnerable elements of our society, including the trans community and the migrant community, just to name a couple. And in this context, in this attack on basically the working class as a whole, it feels really scary. And it feels as though we are in uncharted territory in terms of what feels like this complete merger between the state apparatus and its implementation of the will of the capitalist class to basically kind of do away with every single protection that we have built up over the years. And part of what I want to, a point that I want to drive home here is that this actually isn't uncharted territory. The working class has been here before and won enormous gains and victories. In fact, many of the things that are under attack here that we have previously taken for granted are victories that the working class has won historically under, in many ways, far worse circumstances, with more odds stacked against them. And I want to use that as a framework for us to both, for us to gain some hope about what we can do and take some inspiration about the battles that have come before us under, I would say, far more dire circumstances. And, one of the things that we have to remember is that the union power that we have built in this country was built in context of illegality. That many of the unions that we have right now, that are some of the largest in the country, came about as a result of illegal strikes. And so, in the very brief amount of time that I have, I want to just sort of run through some of that history to provide a context for the fight that we're facing today. So just a really brief run through of some of the highlights in our history. In the 1880s, the United Mine Workers of America engaged in wildcat strikes that formed that union and became one of the most radical unions in the country. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union, ILWU, in the 1930s played an enormous role in terms of creating a radical union movement that won tens of thousands of workers into a union movement. The Teamsters in the 1934 general strike was probably one of the craziest events in our nation's history in terms of radical workers' power operating outside of the law. The United Farm Workers in the 1960s, and then finally the Red State Teachers Revolt that happened in 2018, which was also a wildcat strike to increase funding for schools and education. We could spend all night here digging into all of the radical actions that have happened historically in the country. But I think a key point lesson for some of these is to understand that, these strikes are things that the workers did before they had power. And these were the things that they engaged in actually in order to win leverage to gain union recognition. These were things that happened before they had the protection of union rights. And many of these occurred in the context before legal protections were created, like, for instance, the Wagner Act that made unions legal and made workers' actions legal. These happened before that, so that when these workers went out on strike, when they went out and fought, they were going into uncharted territory in which they were putting themselves out there engaged in illegal actions. And that's really important because that's sort of the context that we're heading into now. Wow, I am already at 5 minutes. So just really quickly, I want to dig into, though, one of these in a little bit more detail to provide some context for what's going on. I want to talk about the Flint sit-down strike that happened in 1936 and 1937. And this was around the United Auto Workers Union. These workers were facing absolutely brutal conditions in their work sites. They were working 10 to 12-hour shifts. They were subjected to brutal speed ups, just constant, just to milk more profit out of them, and were being absolutely worked to the bone. The General Motors, that was the owners there, they used private detectives, they used company spies, and then also the power of the state, the police force, to crush any organizing that they saw. And what the workers did there was engage in an illegal sit-down strike in order to fight against them. They did not go for a picket. They went to occupy their factories, which at that time was illegal because they were on company property, right? So they were out on a limb when they did that. They occupied multiple plants and then set up democratic institutions within their workplace in order to carry out this strike. So they set up security patrols to make sure these sites stayed safe. They set up democratic committees for food distribution and also to negotiate with the union, and also for entertainment, because sitting in there day in and day out could get a little bit boring, right? And similarly, and importantly, the community also came to their it came to assist them. Many of the wives and family members of these Flint workers came out and they defended the picket lines that were happening out front. They fought with the police using clubs. These were incredibly violent actions that took place in which they actively fought with police. At one point, the police attempted to break into one of these sites to crush this occupation. The police used tear gas and guns and actually to go into this facility to try and take it back over. And the workers fought back using car parts and fire hoses and frozen water. And they won. They actually beat back the police. But I want you to think about that is so foreign to us right now that are so used to a more legalistic framework where labor disputes play out in courts. Right? And so now that things are being rendered illegal, people want to talk about oh, well, now we can't do anything because the legal right to do this has been taken away. And that's where understanding this both radical and violent labor history is effective, because if we did it once, we can do it again. And we are facing a period in our history where this type of thing is going to be coming back up again. But the workers stood their ground. They beat off the police with the help of the community to fight back and win their rights. They won exclusive UAW representation of the workers within those facilities. And membership within unions exploded. And why did it explode? It exploded because workers saw this is the way forward. Right? Radical, direct action that nobody is coming to save us. We need to save ourselves. And the workers engaged in that action. And then when they won, they pointed the way forward for other workers around the country in other, in other sectors of society. And that inspiration is part of what we need today. In the brief amount of time I've got left, I just want to say that history and that sort of radical spirit isn't dead. We saw it once again in that 2018 Red State Teachers Revolt that happened, in which teachers, many of which did not have a union, went on a spontaneous wildcat strike that took up not just the question of teachers' wages and salaries, but also school funding as a whole, taking up these broader political questions that went outside of the bread and butter issues of just what was happening internally. And that was just 2018. So we're not talking about the 1930s or 40s anymore, right? We're talking about recent times. And that just provided a glimpse of what is possible when we organize together. We're not waiting for the Democrats to save us, but we are taking our future into our own hands and fighting for something more. And that's what we need to be seeing. And that's what we are here to rebuild today as we are back under attack. All right, I'll leave it there.
Nolan and I did not.
You don't.
Cool. Yeah, Nolan and I did not coordinate our talks, but I cannot think of a more perfect historical context for what I was planning on saying. So, thank you. That was awesome. Yeah. So, I want to talk about some tactics that are getting used today that I feel like are not able to meet this moment, and why the labor movement is different. So the first is to outwardly comply with sort of the Trump administration's directive, but to quietly, behind the scenes, bureaucratically protect those targeted using the power and discretion you have to prevent yourself from being retaliated by the Trump regime and just sort of weather this whole thing out. The other is to just repeat how Trump is a fascist, how he's violating the Constitution and the law, and then just to sort of leave it there. And there is logic to both of those things. And there's probably times when they're both appropriate, right? So why would you provoke litigation and retaliation from a notoriously litigious and retaliatory administration when you can protect, using sort of the power that you already have? And for the second, if you're trying to build a broad coalition, it's easier to bring people together just by calling out sort of violations of the law and the Constitution than it is to build a vision around what an alternative might be. But both those things are incapable of meeting this moment, and they cannot save us. And although they do seem like opposite tactics, right? One is open and you're just shouting fascist, orange Cheeto, and the other is quiet behind the scenes. They're both fundamentally motivated by the priority of maintaining the status quo over anything else. So if you're a university or a state, you're maintaining your funding. If you're a Democratic politician, you're maintaining your corporate donors and not upsetting anyone. So again, the first tactic of sort of outwardly complying, but maybe having some heroic lawyers and bureaucrats behind the scenes doing the work of protecting, which is true. There are heroic bureaucrats and lawyers that are doing that work. But again, that cannot save us. Right, so universities and states, and this is something that we see in Vermont. I think a great example is the Agency of Ed's response to Trump's anti-DEI orders, where they said, we will comply, but we have a different definition. And again, sort of weaseling around and trying to not provoke retaliation from the Trump administration, but also to, make sure that sort of the teachers didn't freak out, which we still did, and we pushed back on it anyway. But it's all good, right? I think also another good example is sort of the Burlington Airport not being willing to sort of, hold ICE to the same to kick ICE out of the airport, which. One example I do want to get a little more into is at Winooski, we passed a sanctuary school policy. I want to talk about, we did have one school board member that was opposed to that policy for just those reasons. Because, right, we could do some of those protections. We could ask that the superintendent could do that himself, could sort of implement some of those, policies. But we can't do anything big and public. We can't use the word sanctuary policy. It doesn't need to be something big that gets voted on by the community, because that'll provoke litigation and retaliation, which to be clear, was not wrong. I don't know if anybody heard, but our superintendent was detained by Border Patrol and interrogated for 5 hours, and they tried to get access to his school computer, which had all of our student data on it, right? And it would be naive to assume that they didn't Google him and know that he was an activist protecting immigrant students. Right, but there's some things that strategy fundamentally can't do. It cannot build power, right? You may be able to use some power that you have behind the scenes, but you're not bringing people together to fight for each other, to fight for their communities, right? You will never build power with that, right? And the other thing that it can't do is it can't actually prevent harm. Right? The Trump administration is going to target somebody, right? By keeping your head down, you're not actually protecting anybody. You're just hoping, again, right? Like you're out camping with a whole bunch of friends, a bear comes, and instead of standing together and trying to scare the bear away, you just run and hope that the bear eats your friends, not you, right? So it's just displacing harm. It's not actually preventing it. And the second tactic of just repeating, he's a fascist, he's violating the law, he's violating the Constitution, right? Again, that's not wrong, right? He's clearly a fascist, clearly violating the Constitution and the law. But this idea that, again, and they're doing so in this clumsy way, right? Like they're making these stupid legal arguments that are obviously wrong, right? So they're playing checkers, so we should respond by playing smarter. We should play chess. But the thing is, they're not playing a game, right? They're grabbing and smashing and taking power, right? We can't outsmart them out of that. We need to build power to counter that. And if you make your case against Trump around he's violating the Constitution, he's violating the law. All right, so Trump is stripping citizenship from people born in this country. And you say, he's birthright citizenship. It's in the Constitution. He can't do that. You can't do that. That's wrong because he's violating the Constitution. Well, now that law, again, makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and using some tortured logic, the Supreme Court says, actually, you know what, there is no constitutional right to birthright citizenship. So what do? You're like, oh, no, we're wrong. Never mind. That's fine. He can do that, right? Because it's not wrong to strip citizenship from somebody who was born in this country because it's a violation of the Constitution. It's wrong because it's a morally heinous thing to do to deport somebody who was born in this country, right? If you're basing your arguments on the law and the Constitution and not building it on solid foundational moral principles, you're building on sand, and that's just going to get pulled out from under you. And Nolan made this. No one is coming to save us, right? There's no line that Trump's going to cross, and the Supreme Court's just going to be like, oh, wait, never mind, take backs, never mind, now you went too far, right? The Trump administration is not going to be like, oh, no, he did something too much, now we're going to turn against, like, our King Trump, right? There's no divine referee that's going to descend from the sky and say, time out, too far, right? There's just us, right? But it's always just been us. That has always been what it is. And our power as workers is not given to us by God or the Constitution or the law or the Labor Relations Board. Our power as workers is inherent to our position as workers. And they can use violent state power to suppress us. They can, dismantle the Labor Relations Board like, SpaceX is trying to do and Elon Musk. But our power to withhold our labor is ours, and it cannot be taken away from us. And if we come together in solidarity, we can shut this country down and take it back. So, solidarity.
Great. Let me get my timer set up. All right. Hello, everyone. As I was coming into this meeting today, I was thinking a lot about I'm Elizabeth. My name's Elizabeth Dunford. I work up the hill at UVM. I'm a member of UVM Staff United. I'm not speaking for them today, but I am a union steward there, so I have a lot of experience organizing with that union. I also would consider myself coming from a background of Palestine activism, particularly with Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation, as well as Labor for Palestine, which plays a lot into how I think about organizing in my workplace. I was kind of joking with Ashley earlier how I've had to transition from systems and kind of empire and these overseas issues to asking HR to follow up with an MOA for another employee. And I'm like, hey, lead stewards, is this fine? They're like, check with the employee. So it's a whole kind of new experience for me as a first-time union steward. But also today, as I was coming in, I was thinking of an experience I had as a grad student in my graduate historiography course. My professor was asking us, why did you choose to study history? And I said, maybe stupidly, I really love humans and I love to learn about them, and I really care deeply about people. And he was like, oh, well, that's a really stupid answer to this question. He didn't say stupid, but he really chalked it up to naivety and really scoffed and kind of pushed it off because he was like, well, that probably depends on who you're studying. And I was like, but I study labor history. So, I really care deeply about this. And I also just had this thought, like, what about all the nobodies? What about all the nameless people in history who have really come together to create it, whether they were forced to, whether they willingly did so, whether their labor was paid or unpaid. And yeah, I was just thinking about that while coming into this talk today, and thinking about all of the amazing experiences over the past few years I've had with just boots on the ground organizing. So I'm certainly no intellectual titan, but I will commit to something. And I see a lot of faces in this room of people who also commit to things and just do really the hard slog of organizing around Labor Day or organizing around social justice. And so, yeah, I was kind of thinking about the actions that have been happening locally that I've kind of been involved with as of late. Some of the things that have been happening up on UVM's campus, as I'm sure many people have heard of, have been pretty nasty. So one of them, for example, sorry, Tristan, you're going to have to hear about stuff that you've also been experiencing a lot of lately, and many of the people in this room who are faculty and staff members and students. We had a dependence audit recently, and this audit was, allegedly just to ensure that our insurances were all aligning, that people who were dependents, were correctly being accounted for. But essentially, they were doing this because they wanted to save money. At the same time, though, they were also asking for really private documents and information that they paid another company over $100,000 to send this information to. And we know that this is an issue because this company has overseas servers. This company has a history of data breaches. But we also know that this is an issue because of our current political landscape right now. People were desperately afraid of their trans children's information being given to this outside company, especially all in the name of saving maybe $500,000, because unions last year refused to capitulate to a ridiculous, basically, insurance scam that all unions were kind of subject to, that they really put a stop to. Outside of, Staff United and United Academics, in our United Electrical Union, there are a ton of staff members who are also immigrants. Yep. They're also extremely poorly paid immigrants. So there's a huge class divide between all of our unions of people who, once again, are really being put in a lot of danger and fear because of the university's desire to save money. But even coming from our quote unquote liberal administration up the hill at UVM, they, really paid no mind to people's fears and their anxieties and the real danger that they've inherently put all their employees through by asking for this really sensitive information. So as many of the people in the room, can attest to, unions across campus, our grad student union friends also showed up, even though they weren't affected by this. We're really able to coalition build. We marched on HR, we marched in the president's office. We had a lot of outreach trying to interface with our new president up at UVM, who of course kept on deferring to HR. The head of HR is now leaving UVM. Are we surprised? No. But this is a huge issue. Luckily, we won some concessions on their part. They're going to keep a lot of this internal now. They have guarantees for making sure that that information is, not going to be shared outside of UVM and will be deleted off of, that company's servers. But this all should have been done in the first place. And so we also know that this is linked to that anticipatory compliance that Matt was talking about. We see it across our campus. We see it in the PRISM Center, which is now being merged with our Women and Gender Equity Center, the Wage Center. They're actually not allowed to call themselves the Women and Gender Equity Center anymore. It's just Wage. The PRISM Center, which is our LGBTQIA+ center for students, is now just PRISM. They're going to be combined into the PRISM Intercultural Center for whatever that means. They're going to deny students who are queer and trans the resources they desperately need, and they're going to inherently create a general environment of danger, malaise, and just fear over time to these students. We've seen this capitulation in the Ivy Leagues, but it is also happening in our state universities in really insidious and quiet ways. So that's another example where throughout higher education, we see these changes happening to staff, trickling down to students. We see layoffs where there are pitfalls in money. And we know that these economic and political things are all really intertwined, because we saw under Biden, genocide was happening. Under Trump, genocide is still happening. We know that it's a effort of our frankly single-party system that is supporting empire and supporting capitalism. But, we also have a lot to look forward to in many ways if we fight for it. This is truly a marathon. It is not a sprint. We know that we can win capitulation from the bosses, from management, from the people in the federal and local governments that really seek to kind of tear us apart. We have a newly formed Solidarity Committee and Staff United that can interface with other unions as well as social justice organizations. We're working towards Labor Day, which has 50 plus Vermont organizations and unions already endorsing. We're thinking about organization rather than mobilization, which I know is kind of in the zeitgeist of activism right now, of really thinking about, okay, we can get people to events, but we're mobilizing again and again. People are getting burnt out because you're creating this deeply intense well of emotion that people are pouring themselves into, and then they have no release valve for that residual momentum that is happening post these mobilizations. So, as Matt will tell you, we have a fall labor conference coming up, hopefully at Winooski High School. We have a lot of really amazing things happening if we keep our perspective broad, we keep our perspective historical, and if we are being intentional and really willing to commit to the daily grind of going out and asking HR, please create an MOA for this person so that they can get paid a little bit extra for the work that they're doing. Because in the long term, that's going to help me outside of my union. That's going to help me in my community. And that person's going to come back to me and say, you patted me on the back and held me up whenever I needed something. And so I want to do the same thing for you. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Will be our final speaker. I forgot to introduce Will Lambek, who's providing simultaneous translation throughout, which is no small feat.
También se me olvidó darle la bienvenida a Will.
You can either hold it or let it.
Yeah, you can just hold it. Dale cuando quieras.
Ok, hola, mi nombre es Maribel Benítez y trabajo en un rancho lechero.
Hi, my name is Maribel Benitez. I work on a dairy farm.
Formo parte del COCO en Justicia Migrante.
I'm part of the Migrant Justice Farm Worker Coordinating Committee.
Bueno, aquí me da gusto estar con ustedes escuchando nuevas cosas.
It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight and learning and hearing new things.
Es un placer aprender cada uno de lo que han vivido, hecho en estos tiempos con este nuevo gobierno.
And it's a pleasure to hear about how you all are organizing under the new government and what you're doing in your contexts.
Bueno, creo que todos estamos en lo mismo para luchar contra Trump.
And I think we're all involved in the same struggle of fighting against Trump.
Cada una de las organizaciones pienso que tienen sus diferentes formas de luchar. Y creo que es bueno conocerlo para tomar puntos y hacerlo cada vez más fuerte, cada organización.
And every organization has their own forms of struggle, and it's important to be able to learn from one another to grow stronger together.
Yo soy una persona migrante. que me costó mucho trabajo llegar aquí.
I'm an immigrant and somebody who it was very difficult for me to get here.
Vivo con el miedo de que migración me pueda agarrar y deportarme a mi país.
And I'm living with the fear that immigration authorities could detain me and deport me to my country of origin.
Pero no por eso me escondo.
But I'm not going to hide because of that.
Aquí estamos apoyando a Justicia Migrante
So we're here with Migrant Justice
para que nos respeten nuestros derechos como migrantes.
for our rights as migrants to be respected.
Nos cuesta mucho trabajo conseguir un trabajo, un buen salario, una buena vivienda, pero a base de estas luchas que tenemos en la organización hemos logrado muchas cosas.
And it's hard for us to find dignified work, a living wage, decent housing, but through all of those struggles, we've been able to obtain many things.
Nosotros, en el rancho que yo trabajo anteriormente no había el programa de leche con dignidad,
On the farm where I worked, there didn't used to be the Milk with Dignity program,
en el cual nosotros no gozábamos de un salario mínimo, ni vacaciones, ni días de enfermedad.
where we didn't have a minimum wage, we didn't have sick leave, we didn't have vacation.
A base de las marchas, del esfuerzo de la comunidad, ahora el rancho en el que yo estoy ya está bajo ese programa.
But through the marches and the actions undertaken by our community, my farm is now part of this program.
Y esperamos que muchos más ranchos puedan llegar a entrar a ese programa porque, sinceramente, como seres humanos nos ayuda mucho.
And our hope is that many more farms are able to join this program because it makes a huge difference for us as human beings.
Gracias a eso, yo tengo la oportunidad de poderme enfermar y faltar al trabajo y me paguen ese día.
Because of this program, I have the right, so basic to, if I get sick, I can call out of work and not lose my wages for that day.
También tengo días de vacaciones, 5 días de vacaciones al año y una mejor vivienda.
And I've also won vacation. I get 5 paid vacation days per year, and I have a better house as well.
Y por eso mismo yo levanto la voz junto con mis compañeros del rancho, a los cuales los animamos a que no se escondan, a que salgan a dar la voz por todos, por toda la comunidad, porque creo que no nada más estamos en riesgo los inmigrantes, sino también los ciudadanos.
And that's why I say that through our experience, we've shown that it's important not to hide, not to try to bury your head in the sand, but to speak out and demand your rights, even if it puts you at risk. And what I say to my community is that it's not just us immigrants who are at risk, but it's citizens as well.
Pues me gustaría que más gente nos siguiera apoyando a Justicia Migrante.
So I'd like to see more support for migrant justice.
Y les agradezco mucho que tomen mucho en cuenta estas palabras de un ser humano que vino a trabajar, no a hacer otras cosas más que a trabajar y salir adelante.
And I hope that my words as somebody who came to make an honest living and to make a better life can be taken into account.
Es muy interesante darse el valor y de unirse a cada organización que esté luchando por los ciudadanos.
And so every organization, every initiative that's fighting for the rights of people deserves support.
Pues aquí estamos y vamos a seguir haciendo marchas, meeting, y le vamos a dar con todo a Trump.
And so we're going to keep at it, marching, rallying, throwing everything we can at Trump.
Gracias.
Okay, many thanks to our speakers. Muchísimas gracias. We want to open it up for discussion now, and please feel free to dive into the nitty-gritty of this. I think one of the things that really struck me in what Elizabeth said is those individual conversations, that individual work that we're doing every day with our coworkers, people in our communities, against the backdrop or in the context of the struggles that are growing out in the streets, I think are really key. Like what we're doing every day to convince our coworkers that they potentially have the kind of power that our speakers have talked about is the key. There are no shortcuts to that. So I'd really invite people to raise difficulties, questions that they're having, as well as positive examples that they've been able to organize over the last several months. We definitely want to get into how do we go from this to workers exercising the kind of power that is necessary to stop Trump. So I have a hand in the back. Should we be passing the?
Okay, this microphone will collect that person's voice.
Thank you. Go ahead.
You want us to come forward or?
No, I think the microphone there is going to catch you.
My name is Michel Cadet. I've been a member of the American Association of University Professors for decades. And a little bit of background before I plunge into a very brief warning. I taught information warfare at the United States at the United States Army College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I gave a 3-day lecture by invitation on information warfare at NATO headquarters, NATO counterintelligence headquarters in Garmisch, Germany. We must use information warfare as a significant component of getting more people involved in this struggle. Accurate knowledge is a powerful tool to motivate people when we show them facts about how this fascist administration is harming millions of people. Millions of people, we're with you. It doesn't matter to us what the immigration status is. We are with you. We can communicate. You have communicated well. Use whatever social media and contacts with journalists we have to communicate our views on justice, on the power of the people to resist, as you correctly pointed out, not simply, oh, well, I'm sorry, we can't really do anything because there's been a new regulation. No. We don't buy that. But we have to express our views, and this is, I'll shut up after this. Never using false information. We will not fall into the trap of giving these enemies excuses to dismiss our values, our integrity, our commitment to fairness and justice. Never post something in your social media or when you're talking to the press that you're not absolutely sure is correct. And my final word is, if you see something online, there's a good chance it's fake, that it's false, that it's a distortion. Be careful. Disinformation is spreading like a poison. Rational analysis helps. Questioning, always question. And use resources. I just remind you, if you already probably know, check Snopes, snopes.com, which is doing an excellent job for us in demonstrating that such and such a statement is false. And here's the proof. I'll shut up now.
Right, other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Just keep it moving. So my question is, Matt, why didn't you send me your speech before this meeting today? Because I really I needed to hear that. But I just came from UVM and faculty senate meeting. We were talking about the identity centers and how all that happened and all this. And part of that discussion people were defending the changes, people were wanting something else, but there was like this assumption that we have to capitulate, but the question was, in what way should we best capitulate? And like what you brought forward was this idea that if you're just ducking, you're kind of like outrunning your friends at the camp and leaving somebody behind to get hurt. And we're not standing up for the things that we have said we value and that are, the things that we have said were important to us. And now we're saying like, well, they're still important, but we can just keep moving away from it far enough that maybe we aren't the ones who wind up feeling the wrath versus other than the alternative, which would be building strength. Right? And it was presented as this false dichotomy of we either change, we do this, or people will lose jobs. Which to me, the thing is really not about jobs in the first place.
They're also already losing them.
There
have already been layoffs.
Because if we are losing jobs at UVM, it's because UVM is cutting jobs. Not because of some external force. They can't take our jobs from us. So we could build the strength to say, if we lose our funding, we make up that funding. But we stay true to those things that we value. So I just want to say, like, your comments really, it really resonated with me that, like, this is a time to stand up and fight, not to just try to stay out of the line of fire. And I think that also is very consistent with the theme for the Labor Day rally of an injury one. I think that really connects to what you had saying. I'm sorry, Maribel. That it unites our struggle, and also could unite us in solidarity in our action. And if we have solidarity in our action, we can not only resist these changes, but like move to a new reality.
And I think like those technocratic discussions and debates about what the regulations are, what are we required to do, what discretion do we have, often serves to sort of obscure sort of the underlying moral principles that we're really talking about, right? Like, what is it that we want and we're trying to protect, and what are we trying to do? And if we're just, if the Constitution allows for them to, deport people who were born in this, then the Constitution is a morally heinous document, right? And, right, like, we, as like, all of the laws, everything, we make it, right? Like it all comes from us as a collective humanity. And to pretend that we can't change anything and we're like hamstrung by rules that we have collectively agreed on is absurd, right? We need to be speaking directly to these moral principles that we have the power to actually address and change if we can come together on them.
I really appreciate what everyone has said, and it strikes me that what you started with, Tristan, is sobering in saying we don't have this figured out how to get there, because the project is enormous. From where we are to get to the point, what made A strong is arguing that we need to be moving toward political strikes to interrupt the consolidation of authoritarianism in the United States. And that means a basis in working class struggle and a program that we're not seeing and people are not familiar with. It's not union rights, it's a political strike to break authoritarianism. So I think we have this moral North Star, which is really about, to me, in class terms, working class solidarity. Anything that breaks working class solidarity is counter to our interests. We have to build that solidarity internationally and domestically as well. And then kind of the two frames that I'm thinking about are, what's necessary to help, among other things, to kind of move this idea of a political strike. One, that the existing mechanisms, whether it's the legalisms or the elections, are not effective. And then two, we have to have a sense of our own independent power in order to make a believable alternative to something that's discredited. So I think it's important for us to make arguments about, there's not an electoral road through the capitalist party, that we do not, our project is not restoring a democracy. There is not a democracy for the working class, for immigrants, for undocumented workers, for black and brown people. There is a really important protection of democratic rights that we have to fight for, but not democracy. That's something that we have to create. It's always come from us. The other thing is we don't believe in miracles. That's there's the metaphor. There's the baited hook out there of the midterm and the elections, right? So while there are politicians and they're on the kind of liberal left, AOC and Sanders, that are resonating with millions of people, and they are kind of reflection of what is happening. They're also projecting miracles, that something is going to happen through the elections, through a party that's led us to this. Okay, so I think kind of those are two parts of that frame that I think we should make. And the last thing is, like, we have to build our class organizational strength. And I think this is a really tricky part, to see how all of this can knit together. Like all of, what all the panelists are talking about, that it's really hard to kind of to see how to generalize this and move it forward. So anyway, I guess that's just stating the obvious, but I think, to me, those are the two frames that we have to bring together. The system is discredited. We are making an alternative, but we have to do it concretely in a way that shows that there's a way to exercise power that's outside of the legalisms and the party structures.
Everybody's being so quiet. People should jump in because everybody's thinking about it. So I'm really curious what people are actually thinking about what we should do. The couple of things that I wanted to say is that Trump is not going to stop. He is relentless, and he's got a program. It's been written out in hundreds of pages, and he's systematically implementing it. And he's got a plan, and our side is not prepared to resist it yet. But we're in a very dynamic situation where people are doing things they never thought they would do. And I think LA is an example. Trump bet the farm that he could crush immigrants in LA, and the immigrant working class, and beyond that immigrant working class people in LA stood up to the National Guard, stood up to ICE, and Trump was forced to retreat. It's a partial defeat of the Trump administration because people had organic, deep organizational work that they had done over years that then could deploy in opposition to Trump in a situation where more people than just a handful would join in. So I think we're in that kind of dynamic situation, including here in Vermont. This Labor Day is unprecedented. If people look at the list of endorsers, we've never done anything like this since I've lived here in Vermont, where we have everybody from the Vermont State Employees Association, which is made up a big chunk of prison guards, have endorsed Labor Day, and you have revolutionaries endorsing Labor Day, and Palestine Coalition, every single union in the state, all the big unions statewide. So people have a sense that we've got to do something. And the question is, and this is where Matt was really right, there's a strategic debate inside that radicalization where people are starting to do things they didn't think they would do before, about what's the way forward to deploy our power to stop Trump. And I think the ones that Matt went through are really right and disproved them that they're going to be failed strategies of resistance. And I think the biggest one is the one that's going to start appealing to more and more people the further we go along in this year, which is the midterms. And so a lot of people are doing radical stuff now But the closer we get to the midterms, they're going to try and turn that into a platform to elect Democrats. And we should just remember that, Paul said it, the Democrats got us into this mess. They are so unpopular that they lost to Trump because they didn't deliver for the vast majority of people. And now they're more unpopular than Donald Trump. Their approval rating is 22% nationally. Donald Trump's approval rating is 38%. So we're in a situation where that strategy on its face looks like a stupid one. But more people will be attracted to it if they don't feel their own power. And that's where we come in, and what we do really matters. Because if you think about the people in this room, we're part of a militant minority that is offering an alternative strategy of building up our class power, because Trump doesn't do any work, we do all the work. If we shut things down, then we can force him to back off on everything. But none of our unions are ready to do that yet. And so the question is, how do we do the patient work and win that strategic argument in the radicalization? That's why this conference that we're going to do after the Labor Day is so important, because we can have this strategic debate and build up our forces so we can begin to do things like political strikes, because it's going to get worse at UVM. It's going to get worse in this state. We're on the list of sanctuary states that Trump is going to go after. Will he deploy the Guard to Vermont? Like, these are real, and the more he hits, the more people are going to start imagining doing radical stuff, and that's where the militant minority of socialists make a big difference in making an argument about how we can deploy our power to stop him in the tracks of his attack. So, but this is a work in progress, and what Tristan said is right. There's no miracle on high. We have to do the hard work in the immediate, but then think big, because we're in such an explosive, dynamic situation. And we have an example just north of the border. The Canadian air flight attendants went on strike. The government of Canada said it was an illegal strike and ordered them to go back to work. They defied that order. So they were in an illegal strike, flight attendants, and the entire working class of Canada was behind them. That's the kind of situation we're in, where if people dare, they will get backup. And so we have to set the examples of people daring to stand up and then organize much broader than we are now for the class power we need to stop this man.
More thoughts and questions are welcome. And again, questions are good and okay. You don't have to have a fully worked out point. Do you want to raise your hand, Travis? And then...
Well, I have lots of questions, and I don't really have any answers. You know, I mean, we have a grasp in this room of where we need to go.
Yeah.
We also, I think we have a grasp of how absolutely unprepared the institutional labor movement is. And that most everything we need to do that might be effective is illegal.
Yeah.
You know, capital in this country has spent, many, many decades making anything that was effective illegal, like political strikes, for example, or really any kind of solidarity. So we've actually made, what Ashley said, what we've got together here, at least on paper, is absolutely unprecedented.
Yeah.
Virtually every union in the state has endorsed. And they've endorsed along with a bunch of socialist organizations and radicals. I've been doing this for 60 years. I have never ever seen anything like this on paper.
On paper.
Making it real is a whole other thing.
Totally.
We had a discussion in the AFL-CIO, like, oh, we're endorsing, great, we'll send $500, great. And then, but wouldn't it be great if we actually got T-shirts?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have any T-shirts identifying our members as union members. How would we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, such basic kinds of things.
Yeah.
We know as organizers, we know you need escalating actions, things that are credible to people, that can move people. That's where I think the conference and, really beginning on Labor Day, well, we've already begun in terms of trying to move towards escalating actions. We've involved maybe couple of hundred people in this state out of a little over 300,000 people who, work for a living and are receive wages, 200 out of 300 some thousand, in strike schools.
Yeah.
And the strike schools have focused mostly about what can we do to make some improvements in our contracts. Not like what can we do to build towards political strikes, which will bring down an authoritarian government. I think we need to think more about what are the steps that might be credible, not just to those 200 people, but might be credible to thousands. And I don't know what, I think it probably depends, in your terrain, in your union, in your organization. But I think we really need to be focusing on that and trying to build almost like a work plan of escalating actions. We know we've got a really long way to go to be effective, which is why people want to believe in miracles like something is going to change in 2026 by going to the ballot box, although very few people actually believe in that anymore. But that seems more credible than political strikes. And those are my questions. What are those escalating actions? You can actually think about moving either rank and file groups, which are small and weak in this state, or actual institutions towards the questions, no answers.
Actually, kind of in a similar vein to that point. My question, I guess, for anyone, since you're all labor organizers in some capacity, is how are you bridging that gap between kind of this, big picture labor history, all of the most influential strikes have largely been illegal. How are you bridging the gap between like that knowledge and then actually getting people to a point in the workplace where they understand and feel their power on conflict, the kind of day-to-day level, big picture stuff? Like, what kind of conversations does that involve? Like, because I think that's the toughest part, is like the big picture stuff comes easy. It's actually getting that to happen. And obviously that's part of what the labor conference is for, but while we have
Jump in real quick. That's a fantastic question.
And you're in the same union.
Yes.
But one of the things that we try to do at Howard Center. So in addition to being the vice president, I'm also the chief union steward. And one of the when you're a steward, it's really easy to get caught up in just the bureaucratic, very step-by-step legalistic process. The gotta secure that MOA, right? But there's a question of like when a worker is having an issue with their supervisor, or there's something on the work site that needs to change. You can really go a legalistic process of like, okay, we're going to file a grievance, and then we will go to step 1 with HR, and we will pursue it up to, step 4. And if that, then we'll file, the petition to go to arbitration, and we'll let the arbitrator figure it out, right? Like, that's one way to go. The other way to go is around saying, well, how many of your other coworkers feel like this? Oh, a lot of them do. Okay, can we set up a meeting with your coworkers? Like, what are they willing to do? Will they sign a petition, right? Can we make an open letter that all of your workers will sign on to, right? And it's, those are little things, but like, those are the types of building blocks where it's, the grievance formation, like that has its place, but it's thinking about how can workers' power and workers organizing at their job site actually build the power to solve this problem. Right? Because when workers can get one little regulation or, sort of protocol changed through showing the boss collective action that gets them to back down, then all of a sudden it's like, hey, when we came together, we changed this, right? Now, that's just, the first step, but right, that's what you're asking about. It's like, how do you start to build those steps? And so like, if you're a steward in your union, thinking about every time a worker comes to you with an issue, approach it as this is an organizing opportunity. It's not just a let me go file the paperwork for you and we'll continue on. It is looking for how do we build workers' power with this issue that is in front of us. And like there's times like a worker will come to me with something, and I'll say, and it'll be like, well, are your coworkers, do your coworkers feel like this? Yeah. Is anyone willing to do anything? Like, will they sign something? They're like, no, not really. And I'm like, oh, okay, like we're probably not going to be able to do anything. But like, I'll file the grievance for you, like, and we can go through the motions. But if your work, if your coworkers aren't willing to do that, then, it is a question of power. It is not a question of are we right about this, right? It's yes, we're right. Do we have the power to enforce that right? Yeah. Well, that's a question of mobilization. And even when, workers answer with no, nobody's willing to do anything, my hope and like at least trying to instill with them that like that's where our power lies, right? So like you or your workers might not be there right now, but it's where we need to get if you want this to change. So if anyone's who's a steward here, just approach every time there's a grievance, think about it as an organizing opportunity as opposed to additional paperwork to file.
You go, Matt.
So I'm again part of Vermont. I'm part of my local is the Winooski Education Association, part of the Vermont Education Association. But I'm part of a little activist caucus of Vermont educators, or Vermont School Workers United. Recently organized a Rank and File Power Institute with some healthcare workers. It was there. But I think our goal is really, we're trying to, again, build that rank and file power among educators, and also trying to push the Vermont NEA to be a more activist, powerful organization. So at our Vermont NEA convention this year, right, again, Trump elected, a lot of things going on, like crazy times to be in education. And we've got our convention and some awards were given out. We had a nice lunch. And then that would have been just about like, again, a couple people had some speeches. We elected people to go to the nationwide convention, no debate on anything. And then again, that would have been the end of the state convention of the largest labor union in Vermont. Would have ended at like 1:30. But the Vermont School Workers United, we had prepared some new business items to bring for debate and consideration. And a new business item, again, is a thing that we're directing sort of the staff at the state NEA. These are priorities they need to take. So we had a sanctuary. We were a new business item that would require the Vermont NEA to advocate for and support locals that were trying to pass their own sanctuary school policies. We had, again, and the thing was, people were like so there for it, right? The energy in that room went from like, oh, we're just sort of doing the rote thing to all of a sudden, oh wait, there's something we can do, right? And that was shocking to people. And some of the stuff that we ended up having this conversation around, and we're one of the new business items that, again, this one was kind of our moonshot, and we weren't expecting, but it was an item that said, in the case of a teacher getting fired for their gender identity, or ICE being allowed to abduct a student from within a school, the Vermont NEA would advocate for a statewide labor action. All right, so we didn't articulate what but on the floor of that convention, it was like, well, we're talking about general strike here, right? Obviously is what we're talking about, right? everybody was there for it. It was so overwhelming. People were like, oh, there are things we can do. And they need to be given, it needs to be shown to them that those are options that they have, right? So again, that building of organizing power, starting small, right? I think we did some of the early events that we did at Winooski. They're called it was called a walk-in event. So again, the lowest barrier to entry. I got a whole bunch of donuts. I made some signs. I stood out front of school before school started, and people could make their own signs or they could hold one, and then we marched into school holding our signs in opposition to this bill H454. So we did some chants, and then all of a sudden, every teacher in the school had a protest sign, and then they took it back to their classroom. So then, when we had another event, it was like, Haley actually already has a stack of those in her class. Just grab there. And then they had protest signs in their trunks, right? Yeah. So and suddenly they are now the type of person who chanted in a march, even though it was 35 feet. We chanted for 20 seconds. They did that. Yeah. And now, again, that is now a muscle that has been built, an experience that they have had, power that they realize that they've actually always had. So it starts small, but, I think, trying to think on as many levels as you can on those little interactions, making sure people understand their power, the power of their union, and then also using the structures that we have to push on the larger statewide and national organizations that already exist and trying to push them into a more activist stance. And those things are not mutually exclusive, right? They need to happen at the same time.
I can very quickly answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
And before you do, I would love for us to hear also from Migrant Justice, from Maribel, because I feel like every time I see people in Migrant Justice, there are more leaders, new leaders, and so the conversations that you've had to build more leadership would be fantastic. So if it's okay, Elizabeth and then Maribel.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So I totally agree, Matt. I think, one, I would say believe in people just a little bit. Two, remove barriers to entry. So even signing a petition that goes nowhere matters because you're educating someone about something. And even if it fails, it matters. And three, also being a proactive union. So a steward should not, I'm speaking from the experience of a steward, but I also tried to organize as a rank and file member, which was also very difficult. So I was just where can I find power? I can find it in being a steward because now I have more access to things that, the board is thinking and feeling. And I'm not just some outside person who's trying my best. And also you get people's emails, which is great. But also being actively proactive to members, offering them an opportunity and a space to speak so that you're building a mandate. You can do that through an affinity forum. You can do that through a solidarity committee. You can do that as a rank and file member through creating a caucus and writing to your board. So I think all of those things of being proactive and removing barriers are just really key in day-to-day organizing and talking with people like you said, Tristan, you just have to talk to people as much as possible. Great.
Bueno, ahí vamos de nuevo. Organizar a muchas personas es muy complicado.
Yeah, organizing a large group of people is very complicated.
De verdad, es muy difícil convencerlas que te apoyen en un proyecto.
It's really difficult to convince somebody to come out in support of a project.
Para empezar, debes de tener muchas bases con las cuales los vas a convencer.
Sí.
Y ellos deben de estar de acuerdo en que quieren llegar a esa base.
¿Base en qué sentido?
En en plantarte en, ¿cómo lo explico? En el punto que quieres llegar, lo que realmente quieres lograr.
So you have to start by talking about your sort of collective objectives. Where do you want to go? What's the goal that you want to achieve together to make sure that they understand or in agreement with that objective.
A nosotros como líderes nos cuesta mucho trabajo que nuestros propios latinos nos apoyen a estas luchas.
So as leaders in the organization, it can be difficult sometimes that people in our own Latino community want to come out and support these objectives.
Y más que nada por el gobierno de Trump, que está en todos lados.
And the biggest barrier is the Trump government, which has its tentacles everywhere.
Muchos de nuestros compañeros dejaron de salir. Ahora, con la organización, los líderes y mucho apoyo de muchas personas, estamos logrando que la gente vuelva a salir a apoyar por las luchas que se están dando.
So at the beginning, many people in our community stopped turning out to things. They stopped going out. But little by little, through our organization and through conversations with leaders to members, people are now starting to come out again.
Ha habido muchos fallos en las marchas, en los meetings, en las quejas, pero también se ha logrado mucho convenciendo a las personas para que nos sigan apoyando.
And there have been, a lot of people who haven't come out, and we'll have a march or a rally, and not everybody's there who we want to be there. But we're still able to achieve things with those.
Sí, como un claro ejemplo, luchando por una renta de una vivienda. Costó mucho trabajo, fue como 2 años.
So one example was a campaign to expand access to housing in Vermont for immigrants. It was a really difficult campaign. It was 2 years long.
Pero así se insistió y a pesar del gobierno de Donald Trump, se ha logrado para nosotros los inmigrantes.
But we continued insisting, and even with the new context of Trump and the federal government, we were able to achieve this law at the state level.
Entonces, los que iniciamos una lucha, tenemos que tener bien claro cómo vamos a empezar a convencer a nuestros compañeros.
So those of us who are serious about the struggle need to have a clear vision in mind of how we're going to convince our coworkers and fellow community members to participate.
Creo que para lograr algo debemos de tener bien planteado esa unión y pues esa educación que les podemos dar a los que aún no la tienen para apoyarnos.
And that means that we have to have a clear vision ourselves and a clear way of communicating it to provide education to those who don't yet have it.
Y como dicen los compañeros, siempre es empezar por convencer a la gente, pero primero hay que convencernos nosotros mismos de lo que somos capaces de hacer.
As my fellow panelists are saying as well, in order to convince our coworkers of something or our community members of something, we have to first convince ourselves that it's possible.
En base a uno, pudiendo convencer, yo creo que empiezas desde abajo por 1, 2, 3, viene la siguiente etapa y luego otra etapa en donde empieza a haber más uniones de diferentes organizaciones. Creo que yo lo vi el 1 de mayo. O sea, fue algo grande que no se había visto anteriormente en otros años. Este año fue muy impresionante.
And it's okay to start small with 2 or 3 people or 2 or 3 organizations and then build from there. And that's what we saw with May Day of this year, which was just larger than anything we've seen before and a very impressive undertaking.
Entonces siempre vamos a empezar desde abajo para lograr algo. A veces no lo vamos a tener de un día para otro. Cuesta mucho trabajo. Lo que queremos siempre nos va a costar, pero nunca hay que rendirnos. y hay que seguir adelante, así sea 10, 15, 20 años, hasta que lo logremos. Yo creo que una sola persona como el presidente no puede más que miles de personas dentro del país.
And we need to start somewhere, and we need to be have perseverance and understand that this is going to be a long struggle. It's going to take a long time. Maybe it's going to be 10, 20 years to build the power that we want. But at the end of the day, the president, who's one person, will never have more power than the people.
So right now it's 7:22. I think we were trying to wrap up by 7:30.
Son 7:22, queremos terminar para las 7:30. Quiero recibir últimas preguntas y luego vamos a tener una ronda de resumen de últimas palabras de
It's been a really, really helpful panel. And I was thinking that migrant justice is a model of a worker organization, the kind of organization we want and need right now. And for many of us in unions, we're in the process of trying to unlearn all sorts of very bad habits and transform our unions into something that resemble that worker-led organization without illusions in legality and without the confining pressure of decades of union bureaucracy, but with a very big vision of liberation. And what people on the panel have described, I think Matt's description of what's going on in NEA is a really clear description of getting from A to Z, a step along the way, back to Travin's question of what are those steps that take us from this unready position of desperation to the kind of fighting organizations that we know have the potential to claim the power that workers have. And partly, I was just thinking, in my union, I'm in the same union as Ken, United Academics, the faculty union. It's way behind what others on the panel are describing. But two really small things that struck me as significant. One was Ken managed to persuade our executive council to endorse Labor Day. And the motivation that he sent them was fantastic, because it didn't just say, please sign on to this. It said, in addition, we need to mobilize members to go, and that means getting a contingent with T-shirts. And then he followed up with a message to the membership saying that. That's the kind of small step that's transformative of a union. The way that Elizabeth described the battle over the verification of dependence was also a model, because you said, bosses had this vision of what they wanted to do, and we marched on HR, and we worked as union members together to push back, and we actually won. But the way my union described that was, don't worry about this. You're being asked to provide verification. Just wait, because we're taking care of it. And then they send a little message afterwards saying, we did it. So you're good. You can continue to sit there. So I want to kind of generalize the perspective that Elizabeth gave back to our unions. Actually, no, that's not the way it went down. It was the show of force that made that difference, and that's the lesson that we need to learn. Not wait for the bureaucrats to take care of it.
I have Ashley, and then I was going to call him myself Ashley, and then we'll throw back to the panelists.
I think the question that Travin posed is the most important stuff. Like, how do we take what is clearly a possibility and turn it into something real? Like, this is an unprecedented thing we pulled off for Labor Day. How do we make it real? And where we've actually got power, and what are the steps to do that? And I keep coming back to, after No Kings, one of the 50-51 organizers, Hannah, who is a ranger on Mount Philo. She organized a protest at the top of Mount Philo, and then came to No Kings and organized all the volunteers for the table, did amazing work. And she loved the event. She went home and burst into tears because she said it didn't make any difference. And that's the issue of just mobilization if we don't turn it into organization and real power. And the thing that I think we need to do at Labor Day is say, it's going to be a big action. We're going to have a lot of people, but we have to turn that into organization. And so like all the tables that are there, all the organizations pitching for people to join, and then to come to the People's Summit of Resistance, that's what we're calling it, and talk there about concrete initiatives that we can take action around, so that then we turn it into the kind of organization that Matt was describing and Elizabeth was describing, and especially Migrant Justice was describing. Because frankly, the people who understood what was coming with Donald Trump better than anybody else, the most sophisticated political discussion was when I went to a retreat that Migrant Justice had, where they, before Trump came into power, said, this is what's coming, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to get ready for. That kind of forethought by a small layer of people then turns into the organizing campaigns. And I think that's how we have to go into the conference thinking about it. But that's not an answer to the question. We need the unions that are putting on workshops to say, this is what we're going to be doing in NEA for teachers to get involved in a campaign where you can initiate this in your school. Same thing with all the other different sections of the workers' movement that is going to come to the conference. Then I think we can start to build the capacity to turn an explosive situation where people are going to turn out in mass numbers. Like we're seeing it in DC. Trump has deployed the Guard again. People came out in a giant block party this weekend, a multiracial block party against the deployment of the Guard in the city. That's going to happen. And so how do we, concretely turn that into a more higher level of organization and combativity?
Thanks. So I just wanted to say a little bit more also about how do we have the kinds of conversations, what Doug had asked, with our coworkers that then turns into action. I think in addition to the conversations, it's all also about demonstrating and ourselves getting used to what it means to fight and organize around things. So, when Helen mentioned shaking off some of the bad habits, I think that's part of it, and I also think it's about just reimagining what's possible. We don't have generations of people who are used to fighting on these issues as working class people or through our unions, and that was really driven home to me in a meeting that I was part of around the identity centers that Elizabeth mentioned. Our union did organize a small action outside of the seasonal retreat that members of the Identity Center were holding right before the start of the semester. And retreat is an interesting word because the staff themselves went into it feeling really underconfident, embattled, et cetera, because of this collapse of the various identity centers under one umbrella, erasing what it is that they do, erasing the words that they're allowed to use in talking with students. And they told us afterwards that having a big crowd of union members outside wearing our union t-shirts made a huge difference in terms of the environment inside that meeting, but also how the workers themselves felt. They went from feeling like, I can't say anything, I'm really nervous, I'm going to lose my job, to feeling like, oh wait, the union is a place where I can do something about this. That said, we're no closer to actually undoing the damage that they've already created. And in the meeting that I was part of, one of the things they shared is that one of their the top administrators of that department said, listen, we don't do DEI anymore. That's done. Jesus. Right? Which is terrifying and so nauseating. And I was sitting in this meeting thinking, that can't stand. Yeah. And so I just couldn't help it. I said, well, when do we burn it down? When do we go public with that? When do we actually fight as a union? And it was met with this sort of we're not at that place yet. And fair enough, we're not at that place to burn it down as a union, but we should be fighting more publicly than a small demonstration outside of this one meeting. Yeah. The response from our union leadership and also from some of the workers themselves was, well, now we hand it off to the students, because the students are in a position to fight without risking their jobs and so on. That's not it. And I think, I was just thinking, Elizabeth and I need to talk some more after this meeting about how we strategize with the rest of our union. There needs to be a big campus-wide demonstrations that all the unions are involved in, along with the students, and not just handing it off behind closed doors. But that the whole act of that is reimagining what's possible as trade unionists and making ourselves fit to fight. You build those links in the chain. Travis was talking about how do we create actions? What are the next steps that are convincing to people? And some of this is like looking for the ways to constantly be sort of combative and public and building that solidarity across broader lines. So that said, if we could have just a quick 2-minute summation from each speaker, 2 to 3 minutes. Do you mind if we just go down the line?
Great.
Sure. Uh-oh. I'll just be totally silent. 2-minute moment of silence. No, I totally agree with you, of course. I think, I don't know, something that I've really taken away from today's panel and these other wonderful people here and everyone's comments, and Tristan, especially what you said, is that there will be some level of risk and sacrifice in this. The easy part is that, like, we don't actually have any options. Like, we don't have to make any choices for ourselves about what we have to do. We are all, in this room at least, in agreement with the need to really build a working class, bottom-up resistance to what is happening outside of the confines of American electoralism. There's really no other option for us. And luckily, the other good thing about that is it really does just take a little bit of commitment, a little bit of risk, a little bit of sacrifice, because whenever you're risking something and sacrificing something together, you can actually win. And we can see that in the history of wildcat strikes and in their illegality. And yeah, Vermont doesn't even give me the right to strike anyway, so I don't even care. It's so annoying, but
Put that on the list, though.
yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Feeling some gratitude as well in the room, but I really do believe in like optimism of the will, and I think that's super important. And things are really, really bad and awful, but that's okay because we just have to keep moving one step forward at a time.
Amen. Yeah, I just want to kind of maybe loop back to a couple of the points that I was trying to make in my talk with a little bit of additional context. With the attacks that are happening right now, I think that learning that labor history is so important because when we talk about unions are so small right now. Well, when you look back in the late 19th, early 20th century, unions were non-existent.
Yeah.
Oh, our labor protections are being rolled back. There were no labor protections. They didn't exist back then. You had, and when these workers were going on strike or fighting for their rights, there were literally just the bosses calling in the police, calling in the Pinkertons, and murdering workers. And they stood up against that. And they won rights. And it's incredibly inspiring. Now, part of what those workers won, which was a huge victory, was a legal framework of protections and rights that did not exist before. And those were amazing victories. But I think when we look back at it, we can see it as both a blessing and a curse.
Exactly.
Right? Because yes, like we want legal protections codified into law. That's amazing. But part of what that did was it took away the idea of workers' rights being enforced through collective struggle, and it put it in the realm of the legalistic process. Right? Now we have, we don't need to organize a picket. We've got lawyers who are going to fight this out in court now. Right? And so it removed that sense of we are the ones who protect our rights. What's in law is just, that's on paper. It is meaningless without the power to actually back that up. And that power comes through rank and file organizing. So that legal framework has actually been partly that curse, right? Because it demobilized workers. It put everything in the hands of labor bureaucrats that is like, we're going to take care of it. We'll fight it out in the courts. And so, in a weird way, this now full frontal assault on our legal rights, this erosion of those legal protections, presents an opportunity for the working class now, because now that illusion of the legal system and the courts protecting our rights, that is increasingly gone. Right, that facade is now fading away, and now workers are now, more and more being faced with, oh, it's just us. What are we going to do to protect our rights? So that very thing that was facing workers in the early 20th century is now increasingly facing us. Of how are we going to organize together? And, I think about, when Travin talks about the very long road that we have ahead of us, I 100% agree with him. But I also, every time that things like that come up, I always remember that saying that, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. That there can be decades of just static nothing, and then there can be weeks where you see leaps in consciousness, where decades happen in weeks. And so I completely agree with Travin, but we should maintain that sense of hope and sense of opportunity that we are in right now, where we can make enormous strides and cover and regain an enormous amount of ground in a very short amount of time. The opportunity is there, and we just have to keep having these types of conversations and doing that organizing work to realize those opportunities that are in front of us.
Yeah, no, I've really appreciated Nolan's sort of historical context for the labor movement. People Summit.
We're all immigrant workers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why. And I really think it's inspiring to hear from Mirabel about the work that Migrant Justice has been doing, right? Like, that is power that has been built just by will and solidarity. And I think that's really beautiful, and I think that should be inspiring for us all. So, thank you.
Sí, lo que digo, ¿no? Todo empieza desde una sola persona. Desde alguien que quiere defender algo bueno.
So everything starts with one person, somebody taking an act to defend something.
Aquí, como todos saben, hace años justicia migrante no estaba tampoco.
And as many of you know, migrant justice didn't used to exist.
Y hace años muchos migrantes sufrieron muchos maltratos.
And there were many immigrants who were suffering many injustices.
Tanto que la gente no podía salir a comprar sus propios alimentos.
And it was so bad that people wouldn't even leave the farm to buy their own groceries.
Lo platico porque mi hermana llegó hace 14 años, hace 20 años, vino a Estados Unidos.
And I can speak on this because my sister, she came here to the United States 20 years ago.
Y cuando ella llegó, no estaba Trump, era un gobierno también peor, creo.
And when she was here, Trump wasn't around, but it was a government that was even worse.
Le tocó vivir esos momentos de no poder salir a comprar su propia comida.
And she went through that time of going through periods of hunger because she couldn't go out to buy her own food.
Pasaron los años, inició Justicia Migrante. ¿Por quién inició Justicia Migrante? Por una sola persona que pensó en todos los demás migrantes.
And migrant justice started with one person thinking about the rights of immigrants.
Empiezan a unirse más personas. Y con el tiempo, ahora bueno, mi hermana ya está en México, gracias a Dios. Duró 14 años aquí. Estuvo en justicia migrante también.
And little by little, people started joining, and the organization was growing. And my sister, and she's now back in Mexico, she decided to go back, but she was here for 14 years in Vermont, and she was one of those first people who joined the organization.
Entonces, a base de toda esta lucha, muchas de las personas ya podemos salir a comprar nuestros propios alimentos.
And so because of this struggle, we can now do things like go out to the store and buy our own food.
A base del apoyo y del esfuerzo de muchas generaciones de año tras año, ya los migrantes también podemos obtener una licencia de manejo.
From people fighting, generation of leader after generation of leader, we now have the right to have driver's licenses in this state.
Ahora los universitarios también ya tienen derecho a estudiar la universidad cuando anteriormente tampoco lo podían hacer.
Now our kids can go to university and get education in the state when they didn't used to be able to.
¿Qué queremos decir con esto? Cuesta mucho trabajo, pero sí se puede llegar a lograr.
So what does this mean? It means that it's very difficult work, but it is possible.
Yes.
De nuevo, muchísimas gracias, and thanks very much to all of our speakers, and thanks so much for a really good discussion. I think folks are going out to Flatbread afterwards to talk more, so hang out, bring those questions or ideas you may have been holding back on to talk some more in the restaurant too. Thanks again.